It's a great pleasure to be with him tonight, Professor Amos Wilson.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you kindly. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to share this time with you and to be invited to be with you. And I'd like to thank you for coming out in spite of all the dire predictions of the weather and so forth. And just in sort of keeping the faith. I'd like to also thank those of you who have supported African World Info Systems in buying our publications. Our book, Falsification, is doing quite well along with the other books, and we appreciate that very much. We want to let you know, of course, that the sales from our books are not personally used by myself, and when I say us, I'm talking about Brother Sababu Plata, who's my main partner there, myself, of course, and Sister Dorothy Lewis, and others who support us at African World Info Systems. The chief purpose is to distribute information and to provide the necessary information and analysis to advance our interest as a people. We're going to talk a little bit about economics this evening. Of course, we don't have as much time as we would need. This would take quite a bit of time. Hopefully, though, I've been promising to do a series on Black Power. I have to announce again that we do expect to get our book out, A Blueprint for Black Power, in March. It started out as a project for writing 10 lectures. And unfortunately, the one, you'll be the judge of that, it has ballooned up to about 600 pages. So this is one of the reasons why we've been a bit delayed. So I think when we get to with the final editing, it'll be somewhere between 400 and 500 pages. And even with that, we are skimming the surface of the things that we need to know.
Dr. Amos Wilson, in his lecture on Black economics in America, explores the historical and systematic factors that have kept Black people impoverished while enriching white supremacist systems. He asserts that the poverty of Black Americans is not due to inherent deficiencies, but a deliberate construct of white supremacy. By embedding a consciousness of inferiority, servitude, and consumption into Black people, oppressors have ensured that Black labor and wealth perpetually support their systems. This exploration parallels the broader context of African nations, where lands rich in mineral and material wealth are plundered to sustain European affluence, leaving African people impoverished. Wilson emphasizes that the conditioning of Black people as consumers rather than producers is central to their economic disenfranchisement. Despite being one of the largest economies globally, Black Americans do not control industries or aggregate their wealth. This lack of economic agency is a direct result of programming designed to funnel Black resources into white-owned systems. By replacing African consciousness with a mindset centered on consumption and dependency, white supremacists have systematically deprived Black people of the tools necessary for collective empowerment and self-sufficiency.
I've stated in other contexts, we brag a great deal about how the Egyptian priests were educated for 40 years, and yet we think that we can accomplish the education we need for nationhood and power, meeting 2 hours every weekend. In a nation that is on top today, that has respect today, is a nation that takes great time in educating its leaders and in educating its important citizens. That 40-year education was not just unique to Egypt, it happens today. If you go through a full, say, PhD program, it's easy for you to spend 40 years getting educated. Even if you don't, if you get a master's or BA or you don't even get that, it still may take you 40 years to be truly educated and to get some sense of how the world operates and to learn the methods and the means for dealing with the world. I've indicated in other contexts as well that every culture has its unique time dimension. And one of the problems that we have today is the fact that we have not yet applied African time to our own processes as a people. I've indicated that our children are being destroyed in these schools in terms of the time system alone, let alone all the other things that are going on there. But because the time system that is being used there has been inherited from another people. We say that they go into the schools with different motivations from the standard population. We say that they may come from various home backgrounds and economic backgrounds with various psychological orientations toward the world and so forth and so on, with a different mission to achieve in life and this and that. And then in the name of equal education, we want them to get over all of this to learn exactly what the others learn within the same period of time given to the others. And when they do not learn what we think they should, or we've been told that they should learn, we're ready then to talk about them in terms of learning deficiencies and in need of special education and all of the other kinds of things we hear out here every day. Instead of reconstructing the time system in terms of who they are and what they have to accomplish as a people. To the topic at hand, I would agree with Dr. Uzima that in a sense, in terms of the topic of this evening session, we are all for those titles. You've heard me say, of course, that in order for us to be in the condition we are in as people, we have to be out of our minds. It is a political and economic necessity. It is mandatory. And I'm not being rhetorical when I make that statement. We are a rich people, and yet we perceive ourselves as poverty-stricken. But our richness is not as much in our lands as in another place. The ultimate wealth of a people is in their head, in their heads, not even in their soils. What do we mean by that? We mean by that the kind of situation we see today, where the people who have the natural wealth in their lands are starving and do not own those lands. And yet people who did not have the lands, did not own the lands, are in control of those lands and in control of the wealth. I've often said somewhat facetiously that perhaps Africans would have been better off economically, politically, and otherwise had we not had the wealth in the African soil. Then we would have been forced to use our minds. The Japanese have no wealth in their soils. They have no natural minerals or anything else. In an objective sense, we should call the Japanese a very dependent nation, but their dependency has not made them poor. They make the people who supply them, make them wealthy. Because of what? Because of the consciousness that they project in the world. When you have the right mind, you can con people out of their wealth. You don't have to have any land if you're smart enough to talk other people out of theirs or take other people's lands. In other words, then, the ultimate determiner of wealth and power in the world is the mind of the human being. And that is why, then, we are poverty-stricken, not because we have not been blessed with wealth, but because we have been robbed of our greatest wealth, which is our mentality and our consciousness as a people. We would have to be out of our minds to be in the condition that we're in today, and to be dealing with almost a total reversal of reality that we deal with today, where those who own least, who are given least by nature, are in control of the most, and those who are given most have the least. This can only occur when the minds of those who have least have been twisted and turned backwards, and their consciousness falsified. We are not a dependent people, even though we think we are. We've been made to believe we are. And yet, when we talk about our stolen wealth, we're talking about other people who depend on it. When we talk about our enslavement, we're talking about people who depend on our labor. When we talk about the $300 billion or more that we earn, we talk about people who have enriched themselves in terms of how we spend that money. People whose first beeline is to the poor African community in America to enrich themselves. We are still America's greatest wealth-producing population right now. The issue is not so much what we earn, for if we earn 300 billion, then we must produce trillions, because in a capitalist system, you only get a fraction in terms of earning of what you produce. So we're getting paid 300 billion. We must be producing well over $1 trillion, which would mean, ladies and gentlemen, that African people in America are one of the world's largest economies. We marvel because a Mike Tyson earns $20 million for a fight, without recognizing that if a Mike Tyson is earning that, the fight itself is generating $200 million. And yet we don't ask ourselves, where is the other 180 million? We marvel about some athlete earning 10 or 15 million a year. Well, if that's the case, then that athlete must be worth to his owners $100 million, $150 million a year. We don't ask ourselves what happens to those other hundreds of millions of dollars. We marvel about a Michael Jackson or someone else who's earned 60 or 70 or $100 million. And yet we do not recognize that the American music industry is probably the largest, second largest export industry that this country has. We think of music as purely entertainment, but music is a commodity. Black music sells about 60% of the music sold in the world. It outsells other people's native music. It is worth billions of dollars. And yet we're willing to sing for pennies a record. And we're willing to give away our major cultural product to other people. We trade far more money with this nation than Canada. Don't be deceived because Canada is a large territory, that it therefore is worth more money to the United States than our black people. We have worth far more money to this nation than is Mexico, even with the NAFTA agreement. Do not again be deceived because it represents a large land mass. We are to a great extent America's wealth. However, that is rapidly coming to an end. And if we do not transform ourselves within the next 5 to 10 years, we will go into almost irreversible decline and perhaps genocidal demise. We do not have much time, ladies and gentlemen. The nature of the world is changing so rapidly and dynamically. We can no longer debate year in and year out about which way we are going. We must now not only think locally, but we have to think globally. Because the very nature of our local circumstances are being transformed by international circumstances. When you look out of this building and you walk out of these streets and you see Asians, you see Koreans, Arabs, others, this is the result of global changes in the world. People who are running away from the dislocations in their own economies, coming here to America. We are looking at a situation here where the world is being transformed and a new world government is coming into being, where sovereign nations will no longer exist. If you have a bit of time, you should investigate the NAFTA agreements and the so-called GATT agreements. Not only does the so-called NAFTA accord threaten to further unemploy African American people, but the NAFTA accords are a major step to where this nation, along with other nations, will cease to operate as sovereign nations within themselves, where the world essentially will be run by corporations, by a small group of white males with an intermix of Asian males, and perhaps a third level of Latino males, but principally European and Asian males who are already setting the world up. Take a little time and investigate the so-called side agreements that were passed over quickly when the discussion about NAFTA took place. What are those side agreements? Why were they not discussed? Why was it required that NAFTA be passed as a whole piece rather than to be debated and passed upon piece by piece? In other words, the U.S. Congress itself of the sovereign United States was told that you must take the whole agreement or none of it. You have no right to take it apart and say, I don't like this or I don't like that, therefore I will not agree with this or I will not agree with that. No, they were told you've got to take the whole thing or nothing at all, and you've got to do it by a particular period of time, which meant, ladies and gentlemen, that the so-called citizens of the United States, through their elected representatives, lost all rights to really debate a major economic agreement that would transform their economic and political circumstances. It meant then that the United States courts and other United States tribunals and bodies could not pass upon legislation that would transform the economic atmosphere and transform the whole geography of the nation. Those people whose jobs would be destroyed, those people whose jobs would be exported, would have nothing to say through their representatives about an agreement that was doing this to them. Some of the side agreements indicate that the rules about trade and differences concerning trade would not be arbitrated in the courts of the United States, would not be arbitrated in the Supreme Court, and would not be arbitrated in the legislatures of the United States, would be arbitrated by an international tribunal in secret session. And the ruling of these tribunals would supersede the ruling of the nations themselves. So consequently then, the so-called governmental agencies that you think you're voting for and that you think are representing your interests will not be able to rule in your favor in terms of the ruling and the arbitrations of these tribunals. So what do we have going on here? A structuring of the world by corporate elites. Because in whose interest is the GATT agreement operating? Who will be doing the trading? You, me, or the corporations? So whose agreements and who is agreeing? We are dealing with Mexico, which is run by about 17 families. An oligarchy, not a democracy. An oligarchy that was embarrassed here last week by that area that is soon going to be taken over by a small group of people. That area whose lands will be ripped out from under the natives so that they may enter into a trade with the elites in America. If you had a chance, did you check out the GATT agreements? Another interesting thing there too. And really check out the struggle that went on between France and the United States that people thought were trivial, where the United States was literally telling France, look, our movies sell well in France. Our movies sell better than the French movies do. Why not give up your industry? Forget about French culture. Buy American culture. We deliver it to you for a cheaper price. Why not give your consumers what they want? And the French said no. But they're telling the French, you have no right to subsidize your cultural industries or to subsidize your actors and actresses and so forth. The only right you have to do is to swing your doors open and let your nation be flooded by American products. But even more ominous was the struggle between the French and the Americans over farming. The French who are subsidizing their farmers, maintaining their farmers. The United States tell them, you have no right to subsidize your farmers. You must create an open and free market. And if the farm products of the United States are much cheaper than the farm products produced by French farmers, then too bad. If it means ultimately that France would have no farmers, so what? It's better for the world. You should buy U.S. food. What kind of nation, even if it has to pay more for its food, would decide to give up a very basic industry like farming and place its very livelihood and place its provisioning in terms of food in the hands of the international market? Only a Negro nation would do that. And the French told them, we're not going to do it.
The foundation of this exploitation, Wilson argues, is the deliberate theft and replacement of African consciousness. He notes that black people have been stripped of their historical understanding, cultural pride, and entrepreneurial drive. Instead, they were instilled with a mentality of poverty and servitude, ensuring that their labor and spending enrich others. This consciousness of poverty perpetuates a cycle where black people are made to feel inherently inferior and incapable of building independent wealth, keeping them tethered to the system that exploited their potential. Furthermore, Wilson highlights the paradox of African wealth and European poverty. Africa, with its vast natural resources, has been systematically looted to enrich Europeans who lack such material wealth in their lands. This dynamic demonstrates the artificial nature of black poverty and white wealth, which are rooted not in natural deficiencies, but in a system of global exploitation. By undermining African agencies and appropriating their resources, white supremacists have created a global economic structure that thrives on black impoverishment. Wilson concludes by calling for the radical shift in black economic consciousness. He advocates for reclaiming African identity, aggregating wealth, and controlling industries to break free from dependency. He challenges black people to recognize the value of their collective economic power and to resist the conditioning that prioritizes consumption over production. By reclaiming their stolen consciousness and building systems of self-sufficiency, black people can dismantle the economic foundations of white supremacy and secure their liberation.